Hello, and thanks for joining us on episode 21 of the Road Monkey podcast. My name is Kevin Pickard. We're here sharing stories of success, overcoming adversity, challenging the status quo, and being creative. As we're moving through season 3 of the show, the interaction on our social media is growing. So please, once you've listened to today's episode, write us a quick comment, share your thoughts on the show, and please share the episode within your network. A big thank you to everyone who listened in, shared and commented on last week's show with Alan Rapley. This week, as promised, we've got another Alan joining us, but this time, through the wonders of Zoom, we're heading across the pond to the United States. Our guest this week is world-renowned author, speaker and performance coach Alan Stein Jr. I first came across Alan through reading his book, Raise Your Game, quite a few years ago. After listening to the book again recently on Audible, I was captivated by how passionate Alan is about sharing his messages, so asked if he would like to share some time for our listeners, and here we are. Using some of the lessons from his career in high-performance sport, Alan supports sports teams and businesses alike, with clients including American Express, Pepsi, Starbucks, as well as NBA superstars Kevin Durant, Stephen Curry, and the late great Kobe Bryant. Our conversation today stems from a love of sport, a passion for sharing lessons, and delves into the mind of one of the early sports coaches to fully embrace the digital age and maximise its potential to support both coaches and athletes around the world. What's interesting for everyone listening is the volume of transferable lessons in today's show, whether you have any interest in sport or not. If you aspire to be successful in any pursuit, there are some wonderful messages in our discussion. So without delay, let's get into episode 21. Raise Your Game, Lessons Learned in the World of Performance Coaching, a discussion with Alan Stein Jr. Hello and welcome to the show, Alan. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. It's great to be with you.
Oh, thank you very much for sharing the time with us today. It's I'd say it's evening here, but I think it's early morning where you guys are, so thanks for getting up and joining us.
No, absolutely my pleasure. Always look forward to a good conversation.
Well, I've given everyone a quick intro to you on the start of the show, but if you can just give us a bit of a background to kind of where it started for you on your journey and kind of where you've ended up now.
Well, I think what's most important for folks to know is that basketball was my first identifiable passion. And I fell in love with the game at 4 or 5 years old. And here 4 decades later, basketball's still a major pillar in my life. And I say that with all gratitude because I'm so thankful that something that I fell in love with as a child still plays a huge role in my life today. And now the role that it plays has changed significantly over the last little bit, as now I do mostly corporate keynote speaking and writing, but I'll always have a foot in the athletic world, which is where I spent most of my career as a basketball performance coach, helping mostly middle and high school age players, but also had an opportunity to work with some pretty advanced and high level players as well.
Looking back, were there any points that you felt were kind of key turning points for you that maybe reflectively now you can say that was something that really changed things for me?
Well, there were several, and I've had so many really influential people in my life that I'm so thankful for. One of the key turning points was as I was nearing the end of high school, so I would have been a junior in high school, so 16, 17 years old, I started to develop an equal love, not just for the sport of basketball, but for the training side, for the strength and conditioning and performance and fitness side, which certainly, at 44 years old, we're talking about the mid to late 90s. But at that time, performance training wasn't then what it is now. It was kind of just finding ways to improve your vertical jump and running some sprints and lifting some weights. But I was really attracted to all of the different ways I could improve my performance on the court, aside from just skill work. And falling in love with the training side is what ultimately led me to doing what I've done for most of my career, which was combine the sport of basketball with my new love of performance training and became a basketball performance coach. And that was definitely one of the most, pivotal decisions and pivotal things along my journey.
Okay. Well, I first came across your journey, obviously reading the book, and looking back, was there a point where you thought I could get a much wider coverage with this and actually share this with a lot more people through writing down what I'm doing and some of the lessons I've learned, and kind of how did that all come about?
Well, you know what? It first started with social media, to be honest. Talking about, I guess, 2007, 2008, 2009, when, YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, this was long before Instagram, but when those big three emerged, and I quickly embraced them and saw those as a tool to be able to share things that I thought would be very helpful to both players and coaches. And, one of the neat things was, up until that point, really the only way for me to scale my message was to go speak at clinics. And for the most part, I was able to travel fairly significantly to do that. But I still saw that you were fairly limited, obviously, by the number of coaches that would attend any given clinic. But as things like Twitter and YouTube and Facebook started to become more prominent, I saw those as just unlimited potential, especially on a global level, to be able to spread the message of what proper and positive and consistent training look like. So I embraced those immediately. And that's what got me thinking along the lines of, what is my ultimate purpose? My ultimate purpose is not just to train the athletes in my community or the players that are right here in my vicinity. My ultimate purpose is to share quality training methodologies and techniques so that coaches all over the world can use those with their players, and saw social as being a tremendous way to do that. And once I had already kind of had that mindset of trying to scale my message, then something like writing the book was just a natural follow-up to that.
Okay. So was there things that you learned, particularly in the more community, local level stuff, and then saw athletes maybe at a higher professional level, that you thought those are particular things that allow consistently successful people to move from kind of more grassroots level sport into more professional sport? And then what kind of things then did you take over into kind of, the business and the corporate world?
Well, for the most part, I noticed that the basics and the fundamentals worked, whether I was working with a 10-year-old child that was just starting to play the game, or someone that had been playing in the NBA for 10 years, that the basics and the fundamentals, from a performance standpoint, the actual movement patterns used in the game of basketball, the exercises that needed to be done to help bulletproof the body against injury, things that would improve things that all basketball players are looking to improve, explosiveness and agility and so forth. I noticed there were so many more similarities than there were differences. Now, obviously, the way I would communicate with a 10-year-old would be vastly different than the way I would communicate with someone that's been in the NBA for 10 years. The level and types of exercises that I would do with a 10-year-old would be vastly different than someone that's been in the NBA for 10 years. But those were less common than the things that were the similarities. I mean, when you break it down to it, whether you're 10 or you're in the NBA, the game of basketball is predicated on shooting, passing, rebounding, defending, and handling the ball. So those fundamentals don't change. And then as I started to get older and started to have some life experience outside of the game of basketball, I realized the same thing. The tenets that it takes to be successful on the court as a player, or the principles and strategies required to create a championship level team, most of that stuff translated directly into the business world, or into life, as we say. These things had such high utility, that if you were a coach and you improved your ability to communicate with your players, those same improvements in communication skills would help you in your marriage, would help you with your children, would help you with folks outside of the game of basketball. So I really started to pay attention to things that had the highest utility, so that they could translate to any other area of life.
Were there any particular moments, especially working with some of the more senior professional athletes, where there was that light bulb of, oh, wow, this is the kind of stuff actually I've been thinking about maybe for a long time, but when you actually hear it from a professional player, did it kind of change things for you a little bit?
Oh, most certainly. I mean, like anyone else, I mean, the guys that I had an opportunity to work with, you can see several of them on the wall behind me here, were guys that I had immense respect and admiration for, just their ability to ascend to the top of their field and be in the upper 1% of their craft. So I always made sure to check my ego at the door and do anything I could to listen and learn from them. And what I was most surprised by, and pleasantly surprised, was by the simplicity of the principles at which they live by. One of the things I learned from the late Kobe Bryant was to never get bored with the basics. And I learned from a lot of these other guys how important it is to blend confidence. You want to be very confident in your abilities, and you've earned that confidence through demonstrated performance during the unseen hours. And you've built that confidence by the type of self-talk that you have, but they blend that beautifully with humility and vulnerability, that no matter how good they got at something, they knew they could still get better, that they had never hit that ceiling and were never, where I'm can no longer improve. And those little concepts, which are so simple at face value, really make up my philosophy to this day. And again, leaning back on that high utility concept, these same principles apply in every single area of my life. And that's where I actually find most comfort from. It's not like you have to learn, well, I have to learn these success principles to be a good basketball player. And then I have to learn all these different principles to be a good coach. And then I have to learn all of these principles to be a father and then to run a business or to write a book. No, it's all the same stuff. And, so to be able to learn from a high performer like a Kobe Bryant or a Kevin Durant, and then take those things and apply them to every area of my life is something I'm truly, truly thankful for.
Do you find now working with younger athletes that perhaps maybe 20 years ago, the hallmarks you may have looked for are maybe a bit different to what they are now that you've kind of seen, instead of, say, looking at an athlete that's amazing at shooting, maybe an athlete that walks on the court and says, good morning, good afternoon, is there early, does everything correctly, says thank you, shows like that work ethic. Do you think that's changed over the last maybe 20 years in terms of developing young talent?
There are a lot of things that have changed over the last 20 years. I mean, just the information that we're all privy to now. I mean, just the fact that you and I are digitally connected through the World Wide Web certainly wasn't as near as prevalent 20 years ago. So the information, the training techniques, things in nutrition. I mean, there have been a lot of major advances, which, again, there's some pros and there's some cons to both of those. But generally speaking, I don't think kids have changed very much. I think kids still want the same things that somebody like I wanted 25 years ago. They want someone that cares about them as a human being first and as a player second. They want someone they trust is going to teach them how to play the game the right way and do things the right way. They want someone that cares enough about them to hold them accountable and discipline them when they don't do what they're supposed to do. They crave having someone around them that's going to push them. So a lot of those intangibles haven't really changed over the last 20 years. Technology has changed. We have a lot more information now, but the foundation of it hasn't really changed. What I try and do anytime I'm working with young players is have really high empathy to that fact. There's a couple things that I need to make sure that I always recognize is, one, when I was younger, I was not as open to coaching as I should have been. I was kind of a hard-headed teenager and always thought that I knew everything. And I think there's a lot of teenagers today that probably feel the same way. And I have empathy for that. So I don't try to butt heads with them, and I don't criticize them. I just let them know, hey, I was once just like you. I wasn't very open to coaching and I thought I knew all the answers. And here's why that really penalized me. Here's why I could have been a better, insert whatever word you want, had I been more open. So you can continue to be closed-minded if you want, but I would encourage you take a different path and try to be more open. So I do have some compassion there, and realize that when I was younger, I didn't have the myriad of distractions that players have today. I actually think it's harder to be a kid today in 2020, global pandemic aside, it's harder to be a kid today than it was 25 years ago because they have so many other distractions. When I was younger, you had one TV with 3 channels. We just started to get like a gaming system like an Atari, and that was it. I mean, for the most part, if you wanted to do something, you just went outside and you played with your friends. You'd pick up the ball of choice and you'd play a sport, or you'd ride your bike or what have you. And kids today, I mean, they can have everything they think they want on a device right in front of them. I mean, to many kids, if you left it up to them, they would just sit in their room all day and stare at an iPad. And as much as it's easy for us as adults to look down on that, I recognize that when I was a child, if you would have given me an iPad, that's probably what I wanted to do as well, or would have wanted to do. So I think as coaches and as leaders, empathy and compassion are the tools that we should always lead with. But to answer your original question, I really don't think kids have changed very much. I just think the world around all of us has changed significantly. And now it's just a matter of how we deal with it.
Well, that kind of leads us nicely on to why I got in touch with you, to actually ask a bit more about your new platform that's coming out. And actually, that's a perfect example of how the world has moved on, where the lessons you've learned over the last 20, 25 years are now applicable to people around the world. And actually, I'd be really keen just to unpick that, of how you built it up, what it's formed like, and actually what the ultimate objective is of that with you.
For sure. Well, so when we hit this global pandemic, and it's just so unique that no matter how far apart we may be in the physical, that everyone in this world is going through some very similar things right now. And certainly 2020 has been a challenging and a trying year. And I know there's some slight differences amongst different countries and different cultures, but for the most part, this really and truly has been a global pandemic. And I'm a professional speaker. I make my money by being at in-person live events, speaking in front of audiences. And as you can imagine, when the global pandemic hit, especially in the beginning of March, almost all of that stuff ceased immediately. So I have not been on stage speaking in front of a live audience in 5 months at the time of this recording. And I've always been a big believer in serving others. So when that door closed and said, okay, I'm not going to be able to speak at in-person events, what are some other ways that I can add value to people? And what are the specific groups that I believe I can add value to? And one of the nearest and dearest to my heart always has been and always will be student athletes. Not just basketball players, but athletes of any sport. And for the most part of any age. I mean, middle school, high school, university, or college level. And I thought, all right, what do I have that would be of benefit to them during this time? And I've got 3 young kids. So I was kind of privy to the virtual learning that they were getting this past spring from the school system. And it is basically the major subjects of school. I know that will be different depending on what country you're in, but, they would do math, and they would do science, and they would do history, and they would, and there's nothing wrong with those subjects. But I found that no one was really teaching leadership or communication or emotional intelligence, or how to properly use social media to your advantage. And I decided that I wanted to put something together during this downtime that would be advantageous to student athletes. Because I also realized, unfortunately, many of the student athletes weren't able to spend the quality time with their coaches and their trainers in person that they were used to. And that if you were used to seeing your basketball coach 5 times a week at practice, now you're not doing that. There's going to be a deficiency in the things you were learning from your coach. So I thought that maybe putting this together would be able to supplement the school curriculums and supplement what coaches weren't able to do at present, and tried to package it in a way that said, if your goal is to be the best you can be as a student athlete on and off the field or court, so you want to excel in the classroom, you want to excel in your relationships, and you want to excel in your sport, here's everything that I believe you need to know, and these are the things that you need to do in order to do that. And tried to wrap that into a fairly brief but easy flowing online course called Your Game Plan for Student Athletes.
Oh, it sounds absolutely awesome. So what kind of makes it up? Because obviously you've talked about how so much of it is transferable from like all these different areas. So were there kind of key pillars for you that you thought that definitely has to be in there? I believe that's a really important part of what's going to develop good students, good athletes, good people.
Absolutely. And those were the pillars that started the whole thing. And most of it was most of it is in video format. I find that for a lot of people, at least the student athletes I've talked to, that's their preferred choice. I mean, I certainly could have written another book just on this, but most student athletes would prefer the interactivity of a video where they can see it, they can hear it, they can pause it, they can try to do something. It is supplemented by some downloadable PDFs that have some things in writing, some different checklists and so forth. But I want it to be primarily video based. And a lot of it is really no different than the Zoom call you and I are experiencing right now. It's me just looking into a camera, sharing what I believe are the foundational principles that student athletes need to be successful in everything that they do. Leadership is kind of the core of the whole program. What do you need to do as a student athlete to become the best leader that you are capable of? What are the traits you need? What are the practices you need to develop those skills? Same thing with being a great teammate. I believe that being a great teammate, being the type of teammate that you want to play with is one of the most important skill sets that anyone can develop. And when we talk high utility, at some point, every single student athlete will stop being a student athlete. Even the ones that play professional, they might be an athlete into their 30s, but they still have another 50 years to live on the planet where they don't identify as being an athlete. Can they learn different qualities that are helpful and useful in their life? And I found that being a great teammate, being someone that others can count on, and that your enthusiasm and energy are infectious to help the rest of the group, those are the types of traits that are so valued in every area of life. I want to teach student athletes how to start working on those things now. And I've also found that when you work relentlessly on these, we'll call them intangibles, you improve your leadership, improve your ability to be a teammate, you improve your communication. Those things raise your stock even on the court or field. So if you are an average, let's say, soccer player, but you're an exceptional leader, an exceptional communicator, you're a great teammate, that makes you become more valuable than just an average soccer player for the team. And if you happen to be exceptional in your sport, you're big, you're strong, you're fast, you're explosive, you're very skilled, you have a high IQ, you're an elite level player, these things will take you to that apex of being the best at your craft. So that was really why the course was designed. I thought to myself, what type of stuff would I have wanted and needed when I was a student athlete? And what type of stuff do I believe student athletes today want and need, and put all of that together in this one package?
I really like that, because I think something that perhaps people can get very caught up in sport or in academics and almost see them as completely separate entities. And actually, I say to young athletes that I'm working with, if you turn up for a university interview or a job application and you've got all your academic qualifications and you put on there, and I'm also a very good athlete, and I've been as part of a team for 10 years and I've got time management skills, and like you mentioned about leadership and all those sorts of things. Like when I sit on interview panels, they're the kind of things that already, like you say, raise your stock. And I think very often when we talk about courses and development opportunities, it's very either sports specific or academic specific, whereas actually this is covering both bases.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you went in that direction, because one of the things I find interesting, especially the curriculums here in the United States, a lot of what's being taught has the very short focus of just performing well on a standardized test. So let me teach you all of the information so that you can do well on this test, and then we just move on. And we're not even going to revisit the material, which to me sends an unconscious message that material is not that important in the first place. What I try to do with this course is teach life lessons that these student athletes will have with them for the rest of their lives. Like, this isn't even just about sport. I mean, I know at their age, in middle school and high school and university age, sport is what's usually most important to them at the present. But if you can improve your leadership and your communication and being a teammate, that you're making an investment far into your future, as opposed to, I need to learn this information so in 2 weeks I can take a test, and when that test's over, then I don't need this stuff anymore. I wanted to offer something with much higher value and much higher utility, and that's really what I've tried to pack into this program, is stuff that will help you in every single area of your life. Because the other thing that I want young people to understand is learning how to give your best, learning how to show up and be excellent. These are things that we need to keep that switch on all of the time. If you just say, well, I'm just going to play hard during games, but I'm not going to give a good effort during practice, there's no coach in the world that wants you on their team. They need someone that knows how to prepare every single day. And similarly, if you just say, well, I'm going to give basketball my best effort, but I don't really need to try hard in the classroom, you're not giving yourself the full opportunity to grow, because you're turning that light switch on and off. You're choosing when you want to be excellent. And it's been my experience with many high performers that you can't choose when you want to be excellent. You need to aim for excellence in everything that you do. Now, it doesn't mean that will be the end result. I'm not implying that just because you choose to be excellent that you'll automatically get straight A's and you'll automatically be an All-American. But I'm saying it's the effort. It's the intentional effort and the purpose behind saying, I don't like history class, but I'm going to show up every day and do the best I can in history class. I know I'm the 12th man on the basketball team, but I'm going to show up every day at practice and give my best effort. And when folks can learn how to give a great effort and work smart and do those things consistently, now you're on your way to being the best you're capable of. And when you work towards being your best self, it improves your confidence, your self-belief. It increases your happiness and your fulfillment. And all of these things are going to be important, as I've said numerous times, for the rest of our lives.
Well, I'm obviously going to make sure we share all the information and links to that in the show notes. But something I'd be really curious of, having obviously been in the coaching world and worked with some athletes who went on to become very successful, but knew them when they were not as successful when they were a lot younger. What were the things that stood out on some of those players specifically? Any either anecdotes or moments you can remember that were kind of like, that's going to set that person apart, and actually for the future, that was a hallmark that perhaps you didn't necessarily realize then, but you look back and you think, that was it, I saw that 10 years ago.
Well, first and foremost is they all had high character. Like, they did the right thing. Now, everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has a lapse in judgment. Everybody does something or says something that they wish they could take back or wish they could do over. So this is never about looking for perfection. It's simply about trying to attain progress. But all of the high performers I've been around, they have a high character. They know what's right, and they do their very best to do what's right as consistently as possible. And it starts with that. Another thing that they all share is they were all very respectful. They respected themselves and their own bodies and taking care of themselves. They respected the coaching staff and their teammates. They respected their school and their community. They respected the officials. They respected the game, and they respected the process. So it's really important to have a high sense of respect. And it all starts with how much you respect yourself in order to continue to grow and to develop. And then all of them, I said it earlier, but it's so applicable that it bears repeating. They had confidence in their ability because they took time during the unseen hours to work on their skills to become confident, but they always stayed very humble and open to being coached and to learning new stuff and to finding a better way. And that maybe they performed a move a certain way, but a competent coach said, well, if you change your feet or you change the way you do this or you change the way you do that, you'll actually perform it at a higher level. And they were never closed-minded to that. They were always very open to being coached. And this, again, is all the stuff that's talked about in that program because there aren't very many schools. It doesn't matter where you live in the world that are teaching things like self-respect as part of a curriculum, teaching things about being humble enough to be open to coaching. And to me, this is the most important stuff. And I love the teaching profession. Both of my parents were teachers for 30 years. The teachers that pour into my own children, I think the world of. But I know a lot of teachers are somewhat handcuffed by the curriculum, and they have to teach certain subjects and they have to teach certain information. And there's simply not enough time to teach a lot of this other stuff. I'm certainly not claiming that I could, change, that if I was in charge of education, I could snap my fingers and everything would change. But, things like emotional intelligence and self-awareness might be some of the most important skills we develop in our entire lives. And it's not formally taught in school. So once again, that is why I put this program together. If I can fill somebody's buckets with some practical and actionable strategies on improving emotional intelligence, that'll make them better in the classroom, that'll make them better on the court or field, and that'll give them some tools that they'll be able to use for the rest of their life.
So looping back to the first thing you said there about their character, is that something, or how do you feel that's honed? Because something I see in a lot of young athletes here that I've seen potentially go on maybe over a 5 or 10 year period, it's been the almost adverse conditions that they've had to go through that have shaped that character. So for you to kind of jump out and say, character is such an important thing, how do you kind of view the way that people approach adversity and how they use that as a tool to make themselves better?
I'm a believer that if something's important, you emphasize it every single day. So I believe wholeheartedly that if you are a youth coach or a high school coach, that you can't only be emphasizing new drills and skills and X's and O's. You need to be emphasizing the importance of high character. You need to emphasize the importance of being an effective communicator and being a great teammate. So all I wanted to do was take and make a course that would hopefully reinforce what parents are already telling their children, what coaches are already telling their children, what teachers are already telling their children. There's that old adage that it takes a village to raise a young person. And I really believe that's true. So I wanted to do something that would help reinforce that. I think if there's a youth coach or a high school coach out there listening right now, ask yourself, how often are you emphasizing the importance of character and of good decision-making and of being respectful and doing things that show others that you are respectful of them? That stuff needs to be taught every day. Just like you need to teach new ball handling drills and shooting drills, just like you need to teach new offenses and defenses, just like teachers need to teach, history and science and math. This is stuff that we need to teach every single day. And then most important, especially when it comes to character, those of us in leadership positions, teachers and coaches and parents, we need to model the behavior that we want to see in everyone else. So you better believe that every single thing that I shared in your game plan are things that I do my very best to live out and model every single day of my life. I'm not perfect. I'm just as apt to make a mistake or have a lapse in judgment as anyone else, but I'm trying to live these things out. And that's where, as teachers and coaches and parents and trainers, we need to be role models. If we want our players and our students and our children to have high character, then we need to demonstrate high character in everything that we do.
Something that I'd like to come on to kind of pull that together, because obviously you're hugely driven and you've got a huge amount of experience from all of this. So how do you yourself find areas for development, and on what kind of things, all COVID aside, have you kind of got on the horizon that you think, right, that's my next thing that I'm going to work towards, that's my next thing I'm going to try and improve on? Because I think very often, like, it can be so difficult to take time for yourself, but actually, like you said, taking that ownership and being that leader, you have to live those behaviors yourself. So what kind of things are you doing for yourself?
Well, I've always put a very high priority on filling my own bucket first. And I know to a lot of people at face value, that sounds selfish because it sounds like I'm just worried about me. But I do those things in service of other people. My goal is to be the best father that I'm capable of to my 3 children, is to be the best keynote speaker or the best author or whatever it is that I'm trying to do. I want to be the best that I'm capable of. Now, notice I'm not playing the comparison game. I'm not trying to be a better trainer than you or a better coach than you. I'm not trying to have more Instagram followers than you or get paid more for speaking than you. I'm not playing that comparison game. I'm playing the comparison game of what I'm capable of. How close can I get to that? And in order to do that, I have to put myself first. I have to fill my own bucket mentally, physically, and emotionally so that I can do those things to the best of my ability. My kids need me to show up as the best version of myself. If I was a coach, my players need me to show up as the best version of myself. If I'm a teacher, my students need me to show up as the best version of myself. And if I don't, I'm actually cheating them. I'm giving them less of a chance to grow and to improve and to develop and to learn if I don't show up as my best self. So the very first step is I have to take care of myself. I do so physically, I do so mentally, and I do so emotionally. I embrace things like mindfulness. I embrace reading and watching and listening to new stuff and being a relentless note taker. I do a lot of stuff for my own physical fitness and well-being. And I do that so that I can be of the best service to other people. So I make it a high priority. Along those lines is I try never to have just a narrow focus in what it is that I'm trying to improve. I always want to be open to learning from other areas. One of the best examples I can give is, I'm a paid professional keynote speaker, but I don't just study other keynote speakers. There's actually 2 genres of spoken word that I study relentlessly. One is hip hop music and one is stand-up comedy. I'm not trying to be a rapper and I'm not trying to be a stand-up comedian, but I learn from both of those different genres because there's things that they each do that I believe that if I emulate those types of traits, They can allow me to be a better speaker and to make sure that my message can be delivered in the most compelling way possible. So I stay open to learning from as many different places as I can. So if I make sure that I prioritize myself so that I can show up as my best self, and I'm learning from outside, then the only other pillar I need to do is making sure that I'm doing the things that I know that I'm supposed to do. That's called a performance gap. It's the gap between what we know and what we do. And I want to make sure that I'm putting all of this stuff into action, because knowing without doing is completely useless. People talk all the time about, they say the phrase, well, I want to add more tools to my toolbox. And my question is, are you using the tools that you already have? Or are you just going to start lugging around a heavier toolbox? I mean, why do you need to get another hammer if you're not using the hammer that's already in your toolbox? So I want to make sure that I'm already putting into practice the things that I know that I'm supposed to be doing in all of these different areas of my life. So I try and do what I know to do to be the best father I can be. Do what I know to do to be the best keynote speaker or the best author. And as I said earlier as well, none of these things are about perfection, because I'm certainly not perfect in any of those areas, but they're all about progress. Can I consistently and intentionally have habits and have behaviors and design a life that allows me to get a little bit better in each of these areas every single day?
Well, I have one more question, and it picks up on possibly some stuff you talked about already, but it's fascinating, certainly across this season, talking to a few parents that they're obviously not just talking about their own development, they're obviously trying to bring up young children. If you could go back to yourself as a child or putting yourself in the shoes as a father, what is the one thing you would say to a young person out there as kind of an absolute rule for life based on everything you've seen, not just in sport, but in wider life?
The number one rule I would give to young people, and advice that I wish I would have adopted much earlier in my life, is that you do not control the vast majority of things that happen in the world and the vast majority of things that happen to you, but you always control your response to those things. And you need to learn how to have the mindfulness and awareness to take a deep breath and a beat, and then choose a response that's going to improve your situation and move you forward. And I say that with a very matter-of-fact tone, because it is a basic principle, but that is not easy to do. When you're faced with a massive adversity, being able to take a deep breath and choose a response to that adversity that's going to improve your situation and make things better is not easy to do. It's so much easier to complain, to make excuses, to blame someone else. Those are the natural defaults for most people. And I know they were the natural defaults for me for a good portion of my life. But the best advice I can give someone is to learn how to choose a response that will move you forward, because you always have the keys to your own car. You always get to choose that response. And, the global pandemic that we're all living in right now is a perfect example of that. I don't control the fact that there's COVID-19 and that there's heavy restrictions on what we can all go and do at present. I can't control the fact that I haven't been able to speak at a live in-person event in 5 months, but I can control my response to that, and I can choose to do things that will move me forward. And if you can consistently make that decision, then you'll keep seeing yourself improve. And one of the best ways you can kind of check in every single night is ask yourself this question before you go to bed. Say, I just spent 24 hours of my life for the progress that I made today. Am I happy with that trade? And if every night you can close your eyes and put your head on your pillow and say, I feel good about the trade I made today, then you know you're headed in the right direction.
That's an awesome message to pull it all together. Alan, thank you so much for your time. It's been absolutely brilliant.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you there, Alan, for such a great discussion. For everyone listening out there still enduring the ripple effects of this global pandemic, that message of owning and controlling your response to whatever circumstances are presented to you, I absolutely love that message. We all want to try and move forwards in life, and I'm sure there's plenty of listeners who want to improve their situation. Well, you heard Alan's message loud and clear. You can complain, make excuses, or blame someone else, or you can choose to respond in a way that's going to improve your situation. It's on you. If that idea and some of the other messages Alan shared today resonated with you, get online, get his book and check out his programs. And that isn't a cheesy plug, but actually a shout out to a piece of literature and a speaker that really helped me on my journey. So I hope it does the same for you. Alan's Your Game Plan platform is also detailed in the show notes, as well as the links to Alan's website and social media pages. I am pleased to share with you that we are in the process of putting together a special episode that will go out just before Christmas and feature you, the listeners. So this really is a shout out to get in touch. If you are happy to join us, share some thoughts on the show, your learnings and what's really resonated with you, please get in touch through any of our platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube or email, all of which you can find on our website, www.theroadmonkey.org. I hope that episode has got you fired up, and stay with us as we've got another rocket ship of an episode coming next week when we speak to the performance and technical manager for Basketball England and former NBA player Mr. Stephen Bucknell. Until next week, thanks for joining us for episode 21 of the Road Monkey podcast.